Lasers are starting. rights.
It doesn't matter. Zero chance of defeating us. Am I being optimistic? Your odds are actually far less than that.
Sure, thanks.
Hacking underway.
So today we'll be talking about behind-the-scenes stories for the Portal series, including Portal 3. More on that later. Talking to Eric, it became clear why he's a comedy writer. He told us a story from when the devs were wrapping up development on Portal 2, and he and level designer David Sawyer butted heads. Towards the end of the game, there's a conveyor belt leading into an industrial masher, essentially a death trap. Eric and his writing partner Jay Pinkerton had a Wheatley bit planned for this part, and finalized it about 48 hours before the lines were due to be recorded in Steve Merchant's final session. At the last minute, they ran it by the guy who was in charge of this area, level designer David Sawyer. But we'll let Eric tell the rest of the story because the frustration in his voice makes it twice as funny.
Jay and I record some quick temp dialogue, put it in there. Level designer, guy I love, no longer works at Valve, Dave Sawyer, but tempers are running short at the end of this project, and it's, you know, a day now before we are going to be in the studio, and I'm back at home the evening, and Jay calls me up, and he's like, Sawyer says it's not a death trap, and I'm like, it's a death trap. The thing mashes you. I mean, I'm losing my mind. Like, it is a death trap. It is a death trap. And we're, you know, bitching. I'm like, but we also know we're gonna have to change this thing. We're gonna have to rewrite this thing because we're gonna, you know, even though it's very, to this day, I would get Dave on the phone and be like, it's a death trap. But at some point, I'm ranting and raving, and I'm like, well, if it's not a death trap, it's at least a death option. And then at some point, and then we're just like, oh shit, that's better than what we had. And so you probably don't remember, but he, instead of a death trap, he gives a whole speech about it being a death option.
So in the final game, Wheatley says it's a death option, and pitches it to players as an easy way to end things. Eric believes that Sawyer's reasoning for it not being a death trap was because it could be avoided. But to this day, Eric is adamant that it's a death trap. We told Eric we'd ask you. Guys, if you think it's a death trap or not.
It's a death trap. All right. If they say it's not a death trap, they're wrong.
So let us know in the comments. Is it a death trap or not? Our interview with Eric happened after we spoke to Portal 2 director Josh Wire, so we quizzed Eric on some of what we learned from Josh. There's tons of Portal 2 areas that didn't end up in the final game, like this mysterious diorama exhibit that looks like it might have explained some of the game's lore. We got the scoop on it from both Josh and Eric. But before we get to that, a word from this episode's sponsor. This portion of this video is sponsored by Domino's. It's just our opinion, but pizza is probably the best meal for a night of gaming. And with Domino's, you can get great pizza delivered to your door quickly and easily, just like we did. We fueled a gaming session of our own with Domino's Ultimate Pepperoni Pizza and a side of Parmesan bread twists. We even tried Domino's Honolulu Hawaiian Pizza, because it's okay to get a bit weird with pizza toppings. Give them a try yourself. And whatever you don't eat while gaming, you can just reheat the next day and it's basically as good as new. Now that's value for money. But the value goes even further for you guys, because Domino's is giving us a coupon code just for our subscribers that you can use until December 15th, 2022. All you need to do is head to Domino's.com and use our promo code by clicking on the link in the description box to get 20% off your entire online order at menu price until December 15th.
Did you know a Half-Life game got canceled because GameStop Valve had with Gear Gaming managed?
Did you know the character Sister Sonic canceled Sister Sonic RPG? So hurry, because this deal won't last long. Thanks again to Domino's for sponsoring that part of our video. And now, back to the trivia. So yeah, Josh Wire and Eric Wolpaw gave us the scoop. Josh told us that this segment of the game was going to play out like a ride at a theme park, and specifically compared it to Disneyland's It's a Small World ride. There'd be a whole song and dance number about the history of Aperture Science while the player went through this ride, with its purpose being to inform Aperture's visitors and bring them up to speed. The idea was abandoned when the Portal 2 team realized that exploring the lore bit by bit across the game could lead to better storytelling, rather than blowing it all on one gag. Josh also told us that the history on display would have been told through the lens of Aperture, so everything mentioned would have been heavily skewed to make them look better, and have all their horrendous actions seem a little more palatable. Eric went into even more detail, and revealed that this segment was actually from a very early build of Portal 2, when the game still used the elusive f-stop mechanic. Eric told us, the diorama thing was part of the f-stop version of Portal 2, which had a slightly different plot. I think it had to do with robots taking over the Aperture facility, and it had actually been mocked up. I mean, real rough, but I know we had art assets for it. These art assets were only roughly drawn out, but the final game would have apparently used a sketchy art style for the set pieces along the ride. Eric continued, telling us that the whole section would have had a narrator talking the player through the ride, and it would have been similar to a part in BioShock Infinite. The part of BioShock Infinite Eric's referring to is the Hall of Heroes, a museum that tells the historical events of the game's setting, Columbia. The Hall of Heroes is very similar to how Josh and Eric described the Portal 2 diorama, with each exhibit coming across as propaganda. In our last video on Portal 2, Josh told us about an unused scene where the player would come across Cave Johnson after his consciousness had been put into a computer which was inside of a cube. The player would then need to pull the plug on Johnson and use the cube to complete a puzzle and climb over a lip. We asked Eric if he remembered any more details about it, and he told us that Cave Johnson being put into a computer was not only written and implemented when Portal 2 was still using the f-stop mechanic, but it was actually a huge plot point of the original version of the game. Eric added, so that went away and we kind of got rid of that whole thing. Actually, some of that dialogue we wrote for the original version showed up in Portal 2 Perpetual Testing Initiative, which was sort of a map maker, and there's actually some funny stuff in there. The plot has all these alternate universe Cave Johnsons, and one of them is a cave that gets put into a computer, and some of those lines are straight from the very original version of that idea. When we spoke to Josh Wire, he couldn't really remember why this scene was scrapped, but Eric did. One of the biggest reasons was simply because it was hard to get the physics on the cord to Cave Johnson's computer to function properly. And while we were talking to Eric about things Josh had said, we brought up Garfield. Long story short, early in development for Portal 2's co-op, Eric and the other writers toyed with the idea of having players collect human artifacts, and one of these artifacts was a Garfield comic strip parody called Dorfelt. When we spoke to Josh, he was adamant that the gag stemmed from the writers' collective hate of Garfield, and that they'd always dunk on it any way they could. We brought this up to Eric, and his response was kinda surprising.
Really? No, I got nothing against Garfield. No, we were just thinking, what's a generic comic, and Garfield was the first one that came to our mind. Just because it's also one that everybody kind of knows.
There seems to have been some misunderstanding about how much the writers hate Garfield. Or maybe it was one of the Portal 2's other writers, Jay Pinkerton or Chet Falasek, who really has it in for Garfield. Either way, we thought this was pretty funny. Some of the more interesting behind-the-scenes stories are ones that you couldn't guess on your own from playing the game, but make total sense once you've heard them. While making Portal 2, the devs had a problem. The original Portal did a great job at teaching players how portals worked, and all the test chambers honed their thinking for solving portal puzzles. The devs needed to teach new Portal 2 players the same set of skills, and this brought up an issue. How could they teach new players, but also make sure that folks who played the original Portal didn't feel like they were rehashing the same game? The answer, surprisingly, came from Super Metroid. Josh Wire is a huge fan of Super Metroid, and one part of the game that sat with him was the game's opening where Samus goes through the Ceres space colony as it's all clean and empty, then has to run through it again in reverse while everything's falling apart. This made them think about reusing the same test chambers from Portal 1 for the opening of Portal 2 to train players, but having them all be derelict. This means they're not simply a training tool for new players, they also clue old players into the overall state of Aperture and add to the story. Josh told us about this in our call, but credit where credit's due. Josh originally talked about this on the Kiwi Talks podcast, and that's the whole reason we wanted to bring it up to him in the first place. Portal 2's development had other inspirations, like the speedrunning community. We asked Josh what was the biggest cut feature from Portal 2, and he said it was probably bullet time. This was a mechanic where players could hit a button and slow things down, making it easier for the average player to pull off complex maneuvers that usually only highly skilled players could perform. It'd also make the game more accessible in general. Josh elaborated, "If you look at Portal, there's the first time where you have to put a portal down, walk through, and reset the portal so you go farther, and there was a massive drop-off in people finishing the game because they couldn't pull it off. And we looked at Portal and said, look, we've got all these people who wouldn't typically come to a first-person shooter type game, why would we leave them on the roadside? So bullet time basically let them hit a button and do the cool ninja thing." Josh went on to say that although it was cool and opened up new possibilities, the devs thought it felt a bit gimmicky and didn't fit the game's design. They wanted to embrace the simplicity of the original Portal, where all the player does is place portals and everything else in the game fits around it. The nice thing about Portal is you really just had the portal gun, and all the mechanics flow from that. This one didn't, and it required an extra button, and kinda had this different thread, so we felt that although it was neat, it didn't really fit. Josh also told us that although development didn't reach the point where an in-universe explanation for bullet time had been implemented, he believes that it was going to be introduced as a new function of the portal gun. But even after they embraced this minimalist design philosophy, some new ideas got left behind. The biggest new addition to Portal 2 was the gels, but two of them didn't make it: reflection gel and adhesion gel. We asked Josh about the cut gels, and he remembered adhesion gel as the one they worked on the most before cutting it. Any surface that you painted, you could just walk on as if that were down effectively, or as if you had sticky feet on the gel. It was neat, you could do cool things, but it made people sick so incredibly quickly. We didn't see a way to ship it because even the hardened veterans would rotate up onto a wall and that was the end of them. They just go, "I gotta lay down," and it would take out people for days. And at the point it was coming into the project, we were like, we got plenty of stuff already. The team were already hitting a certain level of complexity by asking players to think with portals in mind, and bending the player's perspective was adding another layer of complexity. In the end, adhesion gel was causing more harm than good. And like Josh said, they had enough other stuff to work with anyways. Josh left Valve a while back and went his own way, but Eric is currently still working for them. So we asked him some questions about Valve and his future plans. Since there's been a few Portal spin-off games since the release of Portal 2, we asked him how he felt about those, and if he felt protective about other studios licensing an IP he worked hard to establish. He told us the only reason he'd feel protective is if doing more spin-offs made it less likely he'd be able to make a Portal 3. Otherwise, he's all for them. Over the years, it's become a bit of a meme that Valve can't make games with a 3 in the title. There's some truth to it. Valve made lots of sequels that haven't yet had sequels themselves. So we brought it up to Eric and asked if he thought it was a coincidence, or maybe there was a part of the company culture preventing trilogies from being made. Eric told us, "I don't know, it's almost like the numbering system works against us because we made Half-Life 2, then sorta made a 3, but it was an episode, so maybe that was just the luck of the draw." I don't think so. I think Valve staff just keep getting sucked into other stuff. Someday, hopefully, there will be a 3 of something. Eric said a lack of trilogies definitely isn't deliberate, but he does have a theory as to why, sort of. After a developer finishes their first game in a new IP, they look back and see errors in what they made. They get new ideas for gameplay and think of ways to make existing parts of the game better. Then, they're driven to make a sequel because they want to fix all these lingering issues, and when they eventually fix all those issues for the sequel, they're left mostly satisfied. So when the opportunity arises to make a third game, developers aren't as driven to make it because they've already fulfilled their biggest wants for a sequel. Essentially, they're less driven and less interested in doing a third title because there's no regrets left to rectify. And that might be true for most developers, but it doesn't seem to be the case for Eric. Josh Wire told us that Eric is still pretty enthusiastic about Portal, so we asked Eric if he wants to make a Portal 3 and if he had any ideas for it.
Yeah, Jay and I have an idea for that we think is pretty awesome for what would happen, generally speaking. I mean, we don't have a script or any details worked out, but we have sort of a starting point that we like a ton. It's good that we have this idea, but there's a lot left to do. I mean, somebody's got to think up some new portal puzzles, and but we do have an actual idea. Yes.
Well, damn. It seems like Jay and Eric might have enough of an idea to get the ball rolling on a Portal 3. We asked if they'd pushed for another Portal to happen at Valve, or if they'd at least brought it up around the office. Apparently they have brought it up at work, and they've gotten a positive response about their idea. But it seems like they're gonna need a few more people on board. But again, us having that idea versus actually committing to making a game is a way different thing. It's not unknown, but there's no formal pitch process at Valve either, so it's always kind of a, grassroots campaign, I guess. After hearing this, we asked what it would actually take to get Portal 3 into development. Eric believes work would have to start during a period where people weren't otherwise engaged, because it'd be irresponsible to tempt people to leave a project they're already knee-deep in production on. It's a bit of office politics, but it'd be bad form to poach people away from other teams during the less interesting parts of a game's development where people just need to hunker down and get stuff done. Based on what Eric told us, it doesn't seem to be a lack of ideas or enthusiasm that's stopping a Portal 3 from being made, but timing. All we can do is hope that the timing is right sometime soon, and let the folks at Valve know that we really do want to see Portal 3 get made. Did you also know that Portal 2 originally had a collection of death endings that could be set off at various parts of the game that'd trigger the credits and be accompanied by a dedicated song? For more Portal 2 cut content, click or tap the video on screen. Special thanks to Eric Wolpaw and Josh Wire for taking the time to talk to us, and thank you for watching. See you next time.
Let you down.
We'll show new footage and behind-the-scenes info for Sonic Day, and finally reveal the plot of Sonic Chronicles 2. Fans have been wanting to hear it for 15 years, and we got it for them. Let's go through these canceled games chronologically, starting with Sister Sonic. Back in 1991, Japanese studio Nihon Falcom released a game called Popful Mail for the PC-88 home computer. It was a side-scrolling action RPG starring a female bounty hunter named Mail. A few years later, rumors spread that Sega wanted to localize a Sega CD version of the game for America and replace Mail with Sonic's long-lost sister. They basically did the same thing with Puyo Puyo back then too. Sega was worried foreigners wouldn't buy it, so they rebranded it as Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, just like how Nintendo turned Doki Doki Panic into Super Mario 2. or at least that's how the story goes, but not a single screenshot has ever been seen. If you go looking for sources that Sister Sonic ever existed, the only citations are Electronic Gaming Monthly, more specifically just a couple sentences in the magazine's gossip section, later called the rumor mill. The rumor was that Sister Sonic would be at an upcoming toy fair, but that never happened. In fact, it was never shown anywhere at all. EGM's gossip was uncited, with no reference to press releases, dev quotes, or even anonymous sources. So we had to wonder, was Sister Sonic ever a real thing, or just a rumor masquerading as fact for 30 years? We've exposed fake canceled games in the past, and this looked like it was going to be another one. So we went looking through old Japanese magazines, and eventually we were able to find primary sources proving Sister Sonic did exist, but the rumors were only half true. In the November 1992 issue of Japanese magazine Beep Mega Drive, the director of Sega Falcom sits down for an interview and announces 5 games currently in development. One of them was Sister Sonic, which he says is further in development than any of their other games. And it's not just a reskin like Mean Bean Machine. Sister Sonic's gonna be a full-on remake, but she's not actually Sonic's sister. We're gonna quote him at length here. Keep in mind, Popful Mail was originally developed by Nihon Falcom, and Sega Falcom was a joint venture to bring Nihon's PC games to Sega consoles. Director Yano says, Sega Falcom does more than just port Nihon Falcom titles, but reinterprets Nihon Falcom hit series in its own Sega Falcom way. You could say we're cooking them up in a completely different form. I want to emphasize that Nihon's titles exhibit a different thought process and perspective on games. Among them is Sister Sonic, a remake of Popful Mail. This doesn't mean she's Sonic's actual sister, more like a female relative of the Sonic family. The reason for creating this new character and remaking Popful Mail is that it makes more sense for us to use Sonic, who's already popular all around the world. Sister Sonic is the game of our first 5 releases that we've made the most progress on so far. Further down the page it says, Sister Sonic is an action RPG based on Popful Mail, starring the first female Sonic character, Sister Sonic, as the main character. The protagonist being a bounty hunter hasn't changed, but Sister Sonic isn't a cute character like Mail. She's a more mature girl. Expect her to have a flirtatious and sexy charm. Of course, the story's been rewritten to fit the new characters. It has more action than the original, paired with the crisp animation and sound only possible on a CD-ROM. It'll release in Japan and overseas at nearly the same time with Japanese subtitles. So let's clear up some misinformation. We're specifically debunking Wikipedia here, but pretty much all the English language coverage of Sister Sonic makes the same claims, because they all pull from EGM's gossip. So first of all, Sister Sonic wasn't an American localization of Popful Mail. It was a remake releasing worldwide, including Japan. Second, like we said, Sister Sonic wasn't Sonic's sister. She was a sexy relative. And third, Sega wasn't trying to pass the game off as an original work. They were always upfront that it was building on top of Popful Mail's foundation. Actually, if they had tried to pass it off as an original game, it probably wouldn't have gotten canceled. We bought this book from Japan. It says when Popful Mail fans heard their favorite game was getting transformed into Sonic, they started a mail-in campaign asking Sega to faithfully port Popful Mail to Sega CD. A vehement protest from fans, it says. They must have sent a ton of letters because Sega rolled over and did exactly that. Popful Mail for Sega CD released in Japan in 1994, and in America a year later. Even without Sonic, though, it was still a remake. Just look at the PC-88 original compared to the Sega CD version. It's virtually unrecognizable. Now that's all cleared up, you're probably wondering, would Sister Sonic have been any good? Probably yes, actually. US reviewers scored the Popful Mail remake at about 8 out of 10, and these days it pops up on a lot of Sega CD top 10 lists. It's kind of a cult classic and pretty pricey if you want to get a legit copy. In the 90s, it was praised for its visuals, cutscenes, music, which you're hearing now, and the voice acting was impressive for its time.
Most impressive, I must admit. Who are you?
I'm Mail, Popful Mail. Right now I'm after a dangerous magician called Muttonhead. There's a big reward for him.
Presumably, Sister Sonic would have gotten a similar reception, but you know, even better because it's Sonic. And it probably would have taken Sonic fans another decade to get an internet connection and find out it was originally some other game. Sister Sonic could have been an interesting chapter in the canon, and the franchise's first RPG. But we'll never find out, because die-hard Mail fans got it canceled. After Sister Sonic got scrapped, there's only ever been one RPG in Sonic's 30-year history. but there might have been a whole series of them if it wasn't for one man. Sonic Chronicles: The Dark Brotherhood was a Nintendo DS game developed by BioWare, the same studio who made Knights of the Old Republic and Mass Effect. Chronicles ended on a cliffhanger. Sonic says we'll find out what happens in the next episode. Tails promises another game, and the last thing you see is the end ? BioWare said they already had a precise idea what would happen in the sequel, but unfortunately it never got made. For the past 15 years, Sonic fans have been wondering how the story would have continued, so we talked to lead designer Miles Holmes to get some answers. But before we dive into this game, a word from this episode's sponsor, Buyee. If you've ever used American sites to buy things from Japan, you've probably noticed how much sellers jack up the price. It can be a lot. This is where Buyee comes in. Buyee is a service that places orders or bids on your behalf on Japanese shopping and auction sites, then ships the items straight to you without any absurd price hikes. This includes sites like Rakuten, Amazon Japan, and Yahoo Japan Auction. You can even use Buyee to get memorabilia like Sonic figurines and anime goodies. So if you've been wanting to get a hold of a Japanese game or piece of merch but don't want to pay insane rates, this service will let you get your hands on the stuff for a more affordable price. Buyee is easy to use and offers support in several languages, which of course includes English. They also ship worldwide, including to North America, Europe, and Oceania. Buyee has over half a dozen international shipping methods, multiple payment methods, and 4 different insurance plans to match your needs. And if you're not aware, the value of the yen is very favorable to the US dollar right now, resulting in even greater savings. Buyee is also giving Did You Know Gaming viewers 10% off their first purchase for signing up through the link below. So if you want to try out this great service and get 10% off your first order, check out Buyee using our link below. And now, back to Sonic Chronicles. And for some context, let's sum up the first game for folks who didn't play it or don't remember. Don't worry, we'll make it quick. So, thousands of years ago, there were 2 warring echidna kingdoms, the Knuckles clan and the Nocturnus clan. They were bitter rivals fighting over territory and Chaos Emeralds, but fast forward to today and they're all extinct, except for one last echidna called Knuckles. As the last of his bloodline, he spends his days in solitude guarding the Master Emerald. At the start of Chronicles 1, Knuckles gets kidnapped by some unknown warriors. After rescuing him, Sonic and friends find out those warriors were part of the Nocturnus tribe. One of them's a female, male called Shade. Seeing these ancient echidnas blows Knuckles' mind, cause he thought he was the last surviving echidna, but apparently no. The rest of the Nocturnus have been imprisoned in another dimension called the Twilight Cage for thousands of years. The mysterious god Argus locked them in there, and trapped a bunch of alien races from other planets in there too, though no one knows why. Shade's squad came to Earth to steal the Master Emerald and use its power to free the rest of her tribe. But later it turns out the Nocturnus' chief, a guy named Ix, has a secret evil plan. After the whole tribe's freed and back on Earth, Ix is gonna wage war to conquer the planet. This comes as a shock to Shade, who wants no part in a war of aggression, so she joins up with Team Sonic. Ix takes the Master Emerald and warps back to the Twilight Cage. Our heroes chase after him, yada yada yada, Supersonic defeats Ix, and the rest of the Nocturnus are left to rot in the Twilight Cage. With their mission complete, Team Sonic heads home, but realize time had been flowing slower in the Twilight Dimension while they were gone. It felt like a few hours to them, but several years passed back on Earth, and Eggman's taken over the world since no one was there to stop him. And the game ends there, on a cliffhanger. And here's how it would have continued, straight from Sonic Chronicles lead designer Miles Holmes.
Picking it up from the cliffhanger, they come back and it's now Eggman's world, right? So that's a little bit the Back to the Future 2 kind of vibe. We talked about like Skynet in Terminator 2. You know, when you get to see the future, when you get to see what Kyle Reese is from, it's like, but it's all Eggman stuff, you know? So in this case, it's Eggman is basically unchecked by Sonic has been able to do what he's always wanted to do, right? Take over and remake the world in his image. So a lot of the population has been rounded up and they're prisoners or they're slaves or whatever. And you've got machines. Eggman's machines are, you know, this very dystopic kind of Terminator future. So part of that would have been the fun of being able to go to, you know, famous world landmarks and seeing them remade in this Eggman style. So, you know, like going to Paris and seeing like Eggman's gear all over the Eiffel Tower, sort of watching down with a big eye or something like that.
When Sonic and company return to Eggman's Earth, their ship crashes and everyone's scattered to the winds. So the player's following multiple parties and populating them in different locations. Always on the run, always fighting to see another day. Eventually, they get to the point where they're freeing populations from Eggman's captivity so they can build a multinational army to storm Eggman's base and restore world order. Just as they're about to do exactly that, Argus shows up. If you recall, Argus was the Mega God alluded to in the first game, much worse than Eggman. Even Supersonic's not strong enough to beat Argus, so in spite of everything, Sonic and Eggman join forces to take him down. Eggman uses his Mega Death Laser to fire Supersonic out like a bullet to break through Argus's defenses, thus ending the first boss phase. With Argus weakened, the Twilight Cage is thrown open, and everyone who is trapped inside is set free and joins in a massive climactic battle to finish off Argus once and for all. By the time everything wraps up, Knuckles has freed his fellow echidnas, along with everyone else in the cage, and together with Shade, now he's got the potential to continue his bloodline. Eggman runs off, yelling, "Until next time, Sonic!" And so, the status quo's back to normal. The end. Well, except for the final teaser. It was established in the first game that the Twilight Cage is a pocket dimension where the Nocturnus and other alien races are imprisoned, but you never know why. The truth would have been revealed in the sequel. Long ago, an oracle told Argus that someday he'd die at the hands of a mortal, so Argus traveled the universe, locking up entire races that could possibly be a threat, in hopes of escaping the prophecy of his own death. But in the final teaser, it'd be revealed that the oracle's prediction was actually a trick. By gathering up the most powerful races in the universe, Argus was unknowingly building a super team that could destroy him.
It was basically a manipulation. So we're left with this notion of, okay, well, who's the oracle? Who's this trickster god that got him to do this in the first place? Because obviously he wanted all of this to happen. He wanted Argus defeated, and now with him out of the way, the longer question that would have held, that could have been used over the series is, okay, so we've defeated this one god, but now there's this other god that made all these things happen. Why did he do that? What was it for? And will it eventually threaten us? And if the series was going to continue, then yes, obviously, this is going to be a problem, and we'll come back to it.
It wasn't another cliffhanger, more like a teaser that left room for more sequels. BioWare would have considered their work finished with this duology, but hoped another studio, or Sega themselves, would continue Chronicles as a long-running series. So that begs the question, why didn't Chronicles 2 get made? The first game sold about 1 million copies. It was BioWare's first ever handheld game, and they considered it a success. Review scores came in around 75%, pretty on par with Sonic games of that era. Chronicles was basically free money and brand exposure for Sega, so they were happy as well. In fact, Sonic Team told BioWare they wanted to use Shade and Argus in their own games, and the BioWare guys were thrilled to hear it. But there was one little problem: the Sonic comics. A lot of the comics published from 1994 to 2006 were authored by Ken Penders. In Ken's view, the characters he created for the comics belonged to him, not Sega. Shade in Chronicles is similar to Knuckles' girlfriend Julie Sue from Knuckles the Echidna issue 4. Likewise, the Nocturnus clan bears resemblance to the Dark Legion from issue 1, the Twilight Cage is akin to the Twilight Zone from issue 17, and so on. Ken started copywriting all his creations 2 months after Chronicles launched, then a series of lawsuits kicked off between Ken, Sega, BioWare, and the comic book publisher. Sega's position was basically that they own the Sonic brand, therefore they own the rights to everything published in Sonic comics. Long story short, Sega wanted the fight to stay between Ken and the comic book company, but ultimately got pulled in anyway, and the whole thing dragged on for years.
I find it very puzzling, honestly. I've worked with other people's IP for a long time, as he has, and I've never had any kind of notion that I own anything that I'm doing in somebody else's sandbox. I think if Sega had taken him seriously and litigated properly, it very quickly would have gone away. But it was probably a series of unforced errors that led to the result that we got.
We reached out to Ken so he could give his side of the story. You can pause and read his full response if you like, because some of the legal details aren't otherwise findable online. But to sum it up, he sees himself as a small creator defending his work from billion-dollar corporations who want to take it for themselves. Those corporations owe him millions of bucks for using it in Sonic Chronicles, and their lawyers couldn't convince a judge that Ken was off his rocker. Maybe Sega feels they should own these characters, but they never had that in writing. More recently, Ken made some artwork for Sonic NFTs to establish stronger legal ownership over his characters, and Sega haven't tried to stop him. Maybe because they know they can't. They're priced at 100 grand each, in case you're curious. Ken says he's not an unreasonable man. If Sega ever wants to pay him for the rights to make Sonic Chronicles 2, he'll happily sit down at the negotiating table. Keep in mind, all that's Ken's words, not ours, and we gave this script to both Miles and Ken before publication to make sure we presented everything accurately and without bias. As for who's right, well, that's for you to decide. Either way, there's never going to be any re-releases of Sonic Chronicles or a sequel until a deal's made in the courts. That'll probably never happen, which means Sonic Chronicles 2 will never be anything more than the plot outline you heard in this video. Back in 2018, Sega was impressed with the successes of British developer Nitrome, so they invited them to come up with a Sonic game. Then they did. It was called Sonic Day, a one-touch runner for smartphones with a new Genesis-style level added every single day. Mario Run meets Sonic the Hedgehog, basically. We spoke to Nitrome director Matt Annell to get the full story and never-before-seen footage. Sonic Day was based on Nitrome's wildly successful 2016 game Leap Day, which was downloaded over 10 million times purely by word of mouth, without 1 cent spent on advertising. Nitrome's been making games for 20 years. Maybe you've heard of some recent ones like Bomb Chicken and Shovel Knight Dig. Anyway, they just happened to run into Sega reps at GDC, who after hearing about Leap Day, asked if they'd be interested in pitching a Leap-like Sonic. Over the next years, Sega tracked Leap Day's metrics, had Nitrome provide some mock-up screenshots, and eventually build the demo you're seeing now. Matt and a couple other guys whipped up one level in 6 weeks, but of course they would have had a lot more levels and a bigger team if it went into full production. The pitch went all the way up the chain from Sega of Europe to Sega of America to Sega Japan, but ultimately they passed on the project.
Our general sort of answer seemed to be that they had a few projects and they could only do so many at once because someone had to kind of like look over them, and they just didn't think that it had as much potential as other things that they had going on. So it is what it is. It was disappointing. You know, obviously we were really keen to make it. It would have been an exciting project.
Sonic Day was a secret until a few years later when Nitrome posted 1 minute of gameplay on their Twitter account. People loved it, but there was also some backlash from fans mad at Sega for rejecting the pitch. Sega weren't thrilled about it, to say the least. Nitrome never meant for that to happen, and were, quote, devastated by the negativity. They posted the footage because they made it and loved it and wanted Sonic fans to see it. Matt told us Sega has every right to reject a pitch, and he realizes what's fun isn't necessarily what's profitable. Maybe Sega made the right call. No hard feelings, especially since things kinda worked out for Nitrome anyway. After Sega said no, Apple approached them about making a sequel to Leap Day called Super Leap Day. Apple paid to make it exclusive to Apple Arcade, and the sequel ended up making just as much money as the first game. Matt couldn't say how much because of his contract, but it's a lot. And they actually took some of the ideas they would have added to Sonic Day and put them in Super Leap Day instead. For example, the Sonic demo only had vertical running, but if they'd continued development, they would have added horizontal running as well. They also would have had loop-de-loops, as you can see in this development footage that's basically halfway between Sonic and Super Leap Day. And there would have been unlockable mini-games, like the special stages from Sonic 1, and pinball stages because of the franchise's long history with pinball. Sonic Day could have been a great little game with new content 7 days a week. That leaves one last question. Could Sonic Day still get made someday? Matt says, you know, we're Sega fanboys. I had all the Sega systems growing up. We love Sega games. If Sega see this video, if they want to pick up this project or something else with us, we'd be happy. Did you ever want to know why the Chow never came back to Sonic games? For the answer to this and more, click to tap the Sonic Adventure video on screen. Or if you'd rather watch a full hour of random Sonic series trivia, click the other video. Special thanks to Matt, Miles, Ken, and Riboflavin. And thank you for watching. See you next time.
Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Kairos. Welcome to the new season of Naval Action. It's dropped, guys. It's here. We're ready to head out and start leveling up all over again. What can I say? I'm actually really excited for the wipe. I didn't think I would be, but I am. It's good, and people are obviously enjoying themselves right now because there's 850 players online right at this moment of recording. And I'm actually on peak time because I'm up early to record this video. It's probably, I don't know what time it is in the States right now, but it's probably peak time over there. So a lot of these players will be Americans, I suspect, or Europeans. We have a lot of chatting going on. I just sent a message saying, hello, everybody. Someone says, who's this? Sorceress Newbie. Says hello to Kairos. Thank you. Have fun. I'll say you too. So yeah, say hello to everyone.
Why the hell is this still recording for?